Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Holistic Healing with Lori podcast. And I'm so happy to be here with you. Do make sure to subscribe. And today we are going to get into some really interesting stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was sick, whether it was with ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, or with long COVID, or with the lifelong fibromyalgia that I had, I was not thinking about parasites. That was not something that came to my mind for sure. And it didn't certainly come to any of my doctors or health coaches' minds. And what I'm finding again and again is that when we take care of parasites, that the rest of the things that are problematic as far as the chronic symptoms are taken care of as well. And that anybody with chronic symptoms has a parasite problem, period. So we're going to go through that in just a bit, the different types of symptoms that they can produce, that they can cause. And I promise you, if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, long COVID, fibromyalgia, really any chronic illness, you're going to recognize these symptoms and it's going to start to make a lot more sense to you. Now, I do want to say that I am not a medical professional. This is for informational and educational purposes only. This is not medical advice. This is my own experience and research and experience with my clients, with my students, and with myself. So please do make sure that you are working with a doctor. Find a doctor who's open to approaching it this way, right? And we're going to go into more of how we approach it in my relief and transformation program, which is for recovering, to teach you how to recover from these chronic illnesses. And yeah, we're going to go into more of that in the next podcast episode on parasites. So let's go ahead and jump in. And I'm going to do my best to do a combination of some more sciencey kind of stuff and then some more things that are easier to understand, perhaps. But I think you'll understand all of this because I know how smart you are and how motivated you are to get better and to understand what are causing these issues for you. There are different types of damage that parasites can do. There's structural damage from parasites, and then also damage from the toxins that they produce, which is quite substantial as well. And then we're also going to touch on how they affect the immune system, and we're going to touch on co-infections. Because if you've heard me talk about things like mold, Lyme, and the Lyme co-infections, viruses even, you know that when we start treating, we start with the parasites first, and there's a reason for that. And I just want to lay some groundwork here as well. And that's that, first of all, when you get parasites, it doesn't just come in through food or through animals. They can also come in through mosquito bites, tick bites, flea bites, spider bites, through your water supplies. They naturally occur all around us anyway, and to a certain degree within us as well. They do have a purpose within us. It's just when they get way out of control as far as the parasitic load on the body and how compromised the body might already be from other things that it's experiencing. You can get parasites from walking on the ground. Now, I'm a big fan of what's called grounding, which means walking barefoot on the ground. And I love walking barefoot on the stand at the beach and things like that. Just recognizing that is another way that parasites can enter the body. But at the same time, and that's where we want to get this balance, this nice balance of being aware and being cautious to a degree. But the thing is that when your immune system is working properly, and when you do have a good balance in your body and your microbiome of the healthy microbes in your body versus the not good ones or the ones that can take over, then it's not such a big deal when you do get a parasite. And I say when, not if, because you're going to, period. Because then the immune system, the body can take care of it, right? It can push that parasite out. also want you to remember, I have people come to me a lot of times and they say, parasites, they're not an issue for me, or candida is not an issue for me. Fungus isn't an issue for me because I don't have GI problems. I poop regularly. I don't have any pain or anything and all that stuff. That's great, first of all. But the thing is that they can be anywhere in the body. Again, if you have a chronic illness, if you have chronic symptoms, then you're going to have parasites. They can live, in fact, a lot of them, several of the different species of parasites, part of their life cycle in the body takes place in the liver or in the lungs even. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about the lungs and also a little bit more about the liver. This is just some of the symptoms that they create in the body, can create in the body. Abdominal pain or discomfort, that distension maybe if you're feeling bloated, right? I remember growing up as a kid, actually, which I didn't realize, my parents didn't realize that I had parasite problems, but I do remember having a distended belly. And you can see it, I think, more easily with kids sometimes. Air hunger is another symptom that people sometimes have, which of course also goes along with long COVID for some people a lot of times, but it can be separate from the viral component as well. Allergies, any kind of allergies. Anemia, a lot of these parasites, they actually use your B12. So they're taking all of your B12. Anxiety, arthritis, autoimmune diseases for kids, bedwetting, bladder inflammation, pain in the pelvic area, whether that's for when you pee or just that pain in the pelvic area for both men and women. Bloating, like we talked about, chronic fatigue. Hello. Most of these, if not all of these parasites, affect the mitochondria in some way in the body. Constipation, familiar for probably a lot of you out there. I know I dealt with horrible constipation when I was dealing with these things. Diarrhea, or a combination of the two. And diarrhea is no fun either. Eye inflammation, fever, off and on fever. Or also, conversely, the inability to have fever when you're dealing with an acute infection. Flu-like symptoms, food sensitivities. Ding, ding, familiar to anybody, right? Gallbladder and bile duct disease, gassiness, Hashimoto's thyroid. So I would say, and again, this is just my opinion, but I would say that anybody with a thyroid issue also has a parasite issue. And we do see that clears up a lot of times as well in treating the parasites. Headaches, we're going to talk specifically about a few of the parasites that can cause headaches today. Also, insomnia. So parasites are typically more active at night than during the day. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have some symptoms happening during the day, and some people have worse symptoms during the day than at night. But you might find, and a lot of people do, that their symptoms do get worse at night, or that you have trouble sleeping because the parasites are more active then. Itching around the anus, leaky gut, which is happening for a lot of people with chronic illnesses as well. Low blood sugar. Now, I find that really interesting because a lot of people, when especially after they first develop CFS, so myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, or long COVID, which is really basically the same thing, basically. They develop blood sugar issues for the first time in their life. So that can be caused by parasites as well. Muscle and joint pain, nausea, nutritional deficiencies. They're parasites. They're literally feeding on our nutrition that we eat, that we take in. Not only that, but also on the cells in our body, some of them. Seizures for some people, skin rashes and sores, and we're going to talk some more about that as well. Teeth grinding, bruxism. And I think about some of my clients and students who have had that issue for their whole life. And that's where we go, all right, you've had a parasite issue your whole life then. Sometimes it can lead to actually throwing up, weak immune system. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more too. And for some people, weight loss, for some people, weight gain. It's really across the board. And I think maybe you can see why I say if you have chronic symptoms, then you most likely have parasite. Brain fog is another one. There are tons that I didn't even list there. Another thing to realize is that a lot of these parasites not only have a full life cycle of many years within the body, but they also can reproduce in the body. You might be thinking there wasn't an onset, there wasn't like an immediate onset. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. Sometimes it has to do with the microbiome that we're born with, but also the symptoms of a parasite infection aren't always immediate, right? A lot of times it's a slow burn. So sometimes it can cause digestive issues within a day, but a lot of others might not. You might not notice symptoms for a longer period, maybe even for several weeks. And again, like I said before, a lot of them drag on for years, especially most people are dealing with more than one type of parasite, and most people are dealing with co-infections. Which brings me to my next point, which is that parasites themselves they're like a Trojan horse, meaning that they usually have other pathogens within them, like most viruses, all sorts of other things, heavy metals actually as well. And all of those things can contribute to symptoms also. And this is where it gets really tricky getting to the root of the problem. And I'll mention this a little bit more later on as well, but the reason that we address chronic illness in the treating it in the order that we do in the relief and transformation course is because of this, because those parasites do carry those co-infections, right? Because a lot of people are concerned. They say, I need to take care of this, the EBV of that virus, the Epstein-Barr virus, and I need to take care of Lyme, and I need to take care of all these things. The holes. And what we find a lot of times, which is really cool, is that once the parasites have been completely treated and are no longer are not taking over the body anymore, that those other things are taken care of as well. Now, sometimes we do need to come in and address those separately, but that's afterwards. And the reason for that is because the body's immune system is able to come back online once these parasites are taken care of, right? So then the immune system can come in and can take care of the viruses and can take care of the mold and the co-infections, the Lyme co-infections. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the direct damage from, we're mainly specifically focusing right here on worm, nematodes activity. And this is a lot of different things, right? So the main thing is that they can block up these internal organs. So they can block up the intestines, they can block up bile ducts in the gallbladder and the liver. They can block up the lymphatic system. I had this huge, it looked like a welt on one of my lymph nodes. And yeah, so it keeps, the parasites are in there, so they keep that lymph from flowing through the system, which is, of course, very important. They can keep the blood from flowing properly, also through the liver. And then sometimes they can cause cysts to form in the body, in any place really in the body. They can also cause problems in the lungs, like we were talking about with one of the life cycles of strongyloides. Actually, I think it's the larvae that live in the lungs, which can destroy actually very important parts of the lungs. And they can live in the brain and body cavities. And they can also cause neurological symptoms. When we say body cavities and obstructions there, we're talking about the uterus, we're talking about the bladder, really anything and everything, right? Yeah. And a lot of these things, these can cause vision issues. They can cause seizures for some people. And since we're talking about constipation here with these physical blockages, there are other ways that parasites can cause constipation. But if we're talking about physical blockages, a good place to start would be you can get an over-the-counter medication called parental pamelate. Now, I don't love all the different stuff that they put in there. Like they put a lot of weird flavoring stuff in there and things like that. But at this point, you can give it a shot and see if that helps out. And it helps out with pinworm and a couple of other things as well. Now, it's not going to work for constipation for everyone. It depends on what is actually causing the constipation. But again, because it's over the counter, it's a really good place to start if you are having constipation issues. And again, we want to make sure that we're fully treating. So that parental pamelate, some other names for it are Pin-X and Combantrin, and there are other names for it too. But that's not going to be the only thing that you're going to need to do to take care of this whole parasite problem. Now, if you're feeling bloated and looking like you have a distended belly, that's a very clear sign that you're dealing with parasites, and especially with kids. Like I said earlier, I can remember having a distended belly there. And then also physical and chemical damage to the mucosa. So inflammation of the lining of the intestines. And like I said earlier, anemia, because a lot of these parasites, they use up all your B12. And then they can also migrate through the tissues and cause damage there. So some indirect responses, these include hypersensitivity. And this means that the body is having a lot of IgE reactions or immune reactions to things. So we're talking about allergies, but also food sensitivities, things like that. Edema, joint pain, villi atrophy, actually. And this can be in the intestines, also in one of the very important parts of the lungs. And overall, for a lot of people, intestinal transit time is reduced. So we talked before about how parasites can cause actual blockages in the intestines, but some of them, like roundworms, actually secrete an that paralyzes, or a toxin that paralyzes your enzymes. Sorry about that. And your processes of being able to move your bowels are compromised. So not only do we have that initial just physical blockage in there from some of them sometimes, they're actually creating that slowed down motility so that some of them, so that you are more constipated, and then they can actually feed on that nutrition instead of you being able to push it all the way through. And then there are some other things like we talked about with the bile ducts and things like that. And then they also create all these different types of toxins that can create brain fog, that can create muscle weakness, that can create vision problems, that can create pretty much any kind of emotional issues, right? They can create mood issues. So depression, anxiety, all these different things through the toxins or it's still through the toxin, things that they're secreting that make the body not able to create what it needs to create in order for the brain to function properly. So let's see, let's get into some more specifics about just two different types of parasites here, right? And I just went for these because they're fairly common, but you have to keep in mind that these are symptoms from just two different kinds of parasites when there are literally hundreds of different types of parasites that could be causing symptoms for you. But I think that this will really be an eye opener to how parasites can affect or do affect the body, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is strongyloides. And the reason that I chose this one is because it is fairly prevalent and because it's also auto-infective. It's a stomach or a small intestine parasite, but the larvae go to the lungs, and then they can also be in the nasal passages and the sinuses as well. And it's one of those ones that can cause abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation, and severe food allergies. It can cause depression, anxiety, like we said, because of the lung stuff in that phase of their life cycle. A lot of pulmonary symptoms, including asthma, chronic coughing. And if you hear somebody, you might, well, you've got parasite. And you just normally, we wouldn't think of in our society that a pulmonary issue is going to be caused by parasites, right? This one also can cause headaches for a lot of people, food sensitivities, food allergies, seasonal allergies, right? Yeah. And we're actually finding more and more with the research that migraines and headaches are caused mainly by parasites. And again, strongyloides is one of those for sure. Also, just a side note, some of the co-infections of Lyme are very frequently a major cause of headaches as well. Now, another thing that the strongyloides creates is fatigue, disruption in the bowel, like we talked about earlier, mucosa, and rashes. And the fatigue is something that if you have any of these chronic illnesses, you are definitely dealing with. And when people who don't have these chronic symptoms are tired, they say, I'm tired, I'm so tired. But the thing is, they can get a night or two of sleep and their body bounces back. If you're not bouncing back, then you are dealing with something that's going on in the body that's causing these issues, right? And this is what I describe as bone tired fatigue. Then the rashes and the eczema and things like that. I know I have some clients, some students who do have those issues right now. And as these parasites start to be cleared out, then those rashes go away eventually. Yeah. Gut dysbiosis that we're talking about here, of course. Now, the strongyloides can often be found along with, it has a relationship with some retroviruses. And this is really interesting. I'll come back to that in just a second here, but there is some correlation with some parasites that inhibit something called GAD7, which when that's inhibited, your body isn't able to make GABA, which is very important because when there's lower GABA production, there's more glutamate, and this can create a lot of neurological dysfunction, anxiety, seizures sometimes, and sometimes even schizophrenia symptoms. Also, the strongyloides can contribute to interstitial cystitis and with some other eyes and things like that. And so when you think UTI, and a lot of times with bladder stuff, we think bacteria. And yeah, that can certainly be a part of it. But parasites just as easily can be causing the problem. And more often than not, again, the combination of the two, right? And not only that, but these parasites can end up creating an imbalance in the immune system to where the bacteria are more easily able to thrive, the quote, bad bacteria. And let's talk a little bit more about some of these immune interferences. And what's interesting is that the immune system, in order to deal with a virus, the antiviral immune response usually involves a dominant Th1 type response. Whereas the optimal immune response for a parasite, like a helminth, like a worm, involves a type Th2 response. So they're actually opposite responses. So with viruses being more of a Th1 type response, and then parasites more of a Th2 type response, the Th1 type response usually outweighs the Th2 response that addresses the parasites. So then, especially when we're looking at something like the C word, right? Like COVID, then your immune response is open up that T1 response. So then the Th2 is not able to do its job as well to take care of the parasites, right? So we can run into that issue sometimes with people, and there are ways that we can address that to get the immune system back online. Because again, typically speaking, addressing the parasites before addressing the viruses is going to be far more effective and make things go a little faster, right? But what we also see is that when people are in a T1 dominant state, so the state that is addressing the viruses more, that they end up having more parasite infection, and then they also have more allergies. And this is where MCAS comes in really sometimes too. We're talking about seasonal allergies, food allergies, all these sensitivities, because they are having a very high IgE response to everything. Now, interesting, because without the retrovirus in the body, without the virus in the body, if you're just dealing with the parasite, if you're just dealing with, in this case, we're talking about strongyloides, then your immune system is going to be Th2 dominant, right? So this is where sometimes it's interesting to bring in the labs and the markers. And those are going to change depending on whether your strongyloides by itself or if it's associated with a retrovirus, which again, those often go along together there. The strongyloides is the most common human parasitic nematode that is able to complete a life cycle and to proliferate within the host, actually. And that's important because, again, we're talking about just not just the whole life cycle is within the human body or can be within the human body, but also they can reproduce within there and just keep going and going. Now, I mentioned earlier on the liver. And this is really important because this is another place where the life cycle of some of these parasites takes place. And part of the reason that's such a good place for them to be, for the parasites to be, maybe even the eggs or the larvae, is because they can evade the immune response in the liver. They can do that really well. So Ascaris, schistosomus, plasmodiums, they all need the liver to complete the life cycle. That's just a couple of those. And it's smart for them to do that. They've probably developed that over a long period of time because, again, it's able to evade the immune system. So that's really exploited by the parasite. And similar with some of these other co-infections as well. Now, some of these things can also actually block the immune Th1 function. So this is where sometimes if I see a client who is not able to overcome Epstein-Barr or the toxin that goes along with that, and they have IgG markers that are really high for different types of viruses like HHV6, and maybe they're also struggling with Lyme, and the infections are affecting that T1 that should be helping out with these viruses, right? And you can also go through and say, okay, so for some of these people who are coming to me and they have been treating Lyme for the past 10 years and they are still having issues with it. And again, we don't go for the Lyme first. We go for it later on. We focus in on the parasite and we balance the immune system and do several other things, and the body's able to take care of the Lyme itself. So let's talk about now, we talked about strongyloides. Let's talk about Ascaris. And this is roundworms. And this is really interesting, y'all. So they actually have their glyoxylate cycle that takes over the normal Krebs cycle. And of course, we know that the Krebs cycle is what creates energy. So when these little suckers have taken over our normal Krebs cycle, then this is going to create low ATP production and cause fatigue, right? So that's another function of how these parasites can create that fatigue. And in this particular case, it very specifically targets the actual cycle that creates our energy. Also, Ascaris destroys the vitamin C in organs where they are infecting. And then it also, like we were talking about the Trojan horse earlier, it can harbor bacteria, and these bacteria can affect nitrate metabolism and other processes and do things like cause night sweat. I'm actually perimenopausal right now, and there's that kind of night sweats, which actually, if your body is balanced, then that's one of the ways. If you're having a lot of trouble with your hormones, then you probably are also dealing with a parasite issue. But if you're having night sweats, it's not necessarily hormones. It could be parasite. And a lot of kids wake up just in a pile of sweat. And then we talked earlier about grinding of teeth. And that usually means that we're talking about roundworms or pinworms. Acne is another big one for Ascaris. Now, this is really interesting to me because I have clients and students who took a bunch of antibiotics when they were growing up for acne specifically. Now, the thing is that as we're learning here, possible cause of the acne, parasites. And then when you take antibiotics, you're actually killing off the good stuff, which is lowering the immune system and lowering your response to be able for your body to be able to take care of the parasite. And it's opening up a ton of room for the parasites to be able to proliferate. And you might be thinking these things about parasites, it's like they're just worms, but they interrupt so many different processes in the body. So this is why it's so important to get these things cleared out. They harbor adenoviruses, so things like cold viruses. And it's actually really interesting because I've had people who are treating and they haven't had a herpes outbreak in forever, in like decades. And all of a sudden they're having herpes outbreaks or they get a head cold because these viruses are coming out as we're taking care of the parasites. And we address that as best we can. But again, that's one of those things that when you're lowering that parasitic load, once you get it to a certain point, the immune system is able to come back online. I have another student who she had not had this for years and years. And she just got an acute illness, which of course we want to avoid those as much as possible. But she got one and she actually developed a fever and she sweat for the first time in forever. So what that lets us know is that the immune system is coming back online because of the fever and the drainage pathways are coming back online as well because of the sweating. So yes, yay, we celebrate that for sure. Then also with these Ascaris roundworms, we're talking about eczema, possibly seizures, depression, schizophrenia, even those types of symptoms for some people, constipation. And these roundworms, the Ascaris roundworm is very common. This is one that my clients and patients see in their stool a lot of times. I saw a lot of these suckers in there as well. And then we touched on the Lyme and those co-infections along with these parasites, but actually Dr. Alan McDonald did some research and found that this is in MS patients, that there was a connection between Lyme and parasites. And the connection was that every tissue that they examined within these people who had MS that not only did they have Lyme, but they also had nematodes in the nervous system, right? So that's really interesting. And then also there's a Dr. Bregdorfer who, when they looked at ticks, and they found that 40% of the ticks also had nematode larvae, not just Lyme. Again, when we're talking about how we get these parasites, it can be through tick bites, it can be through mosquito bites, it can be through all these different things, along with this cocktail of parasites and Lyme and microbes and all this stuff. And I really always want to bring this back to the good news, and that's that these things you can take care of these things. And then when you get your body back online and you make sure that you're doing your maintenance, doing parasite cleansing and taking care of mold and things like that, then you are able to, your immune system is so hardy that these aren't problems anymore, right? Yeah. And like I said, it becomes less and less about going after Lyme specifically. And because it really is, okay, all you have to do is clear out the parasites and then the Lyme is taken care of afterwards. So that's really interesting. It really goes back to this immune function that we've been talking about, right? And that once the parasites are gone, the immune system is able to come back online and then that balance comes back in. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about some of the testing that you can do. And I'll just give you a little spoiler here. I'm not a huge fan of the tests that are available out there because they are so rarely accurate. But we're going to talk about some things that you can do, and sometimes they are helpful. So it just depends. And we're also going to be talking about how we address all of these issues, how we treat for parasites in the Relief and Transformation Program, and some steps that you can go ahead and get started with on your own. Yeah, and we'll go into more about that. So I hope that this was helpful for you. And again, my message is always one of hope, because when you are able to find someone who knows how to address these things and who has experience with it, then, and that can guide you through this and that takes a holistic approach, then you're going to be able to move through these things and to get to the other side of this. And whether you work with me or with somebody else, I just want you to know that it is not only possible, but it is inevitable when you take those steps. And when you find somebody who's going to work with you in such a way that it's tailored for you specifically. And also, of course, you want to do things like addressing your nervous system, and your emotional health is very important as well. And eating right and all those different things. And those are all things that we do in the Relief and Transformation course. Again, I hope that this was helpful. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Holistic Healing with Lori podcast. And I do hope that you found our conversation enlightening and helpful. That is always my goal. If you did, I have a small favor to ask. Please do consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. That would really, really help us, not only to improve, but also to help others to discover the podcast. And especially if you know someone who is navigating their way through ME/CFS, through long COVID, fibromyalgia, or any chronic illness, please also share this podcast with them. You know, my mission is to reach as many people as possible, to instill this feeling of hope and help, and to share the insights and strategies that I know really work to help them on their healing journey. And just remember that you're not alone in this. We're in this all together, learning and growing and healing. And I'll see you next time.